So, let me ask you a question. When you hear the phrase climate refugee, what do you think of? Do you think of a picture like this? This picture was used in the Brexit campaign by Nigel Farage to essentially work up dislike of migrants and refugees. You'll notice they're male, predominantly male, and they are queuing, as in they're queuing to get into somewhere. Now, these people have come from Syria, from Afghanistan. They are places where it was thought there was a big climate impact, which there was, but that was not necessarily why they moved. Let's look at the next slide. Is this picture more like a climate refugee? They're not all male, in fact, they're all female. So you might wonder about how we see migrants. Do we have different sympathies for them according to their gender? They're from the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they were from a place that was affected by climate extremes. Actually, there's no such thing as a climate refugee. The UN is particular about this because the Refugee Act of 1951 was seen as a real success of the UN. It basically says, in non-legalistic language, if you've crossed the border and are too afraid to go back because of fear of persecution, you are a refugee and you can claim refugee rights. That doesn't apply to climate change. You're not going to be persecuted because you go back because of climate change. We're not at that stage yet. Or are these climate migrants? They've moved because of the climate. Oh, Sexy Beast, film with Ray Winston in it. It's about him sitting around the pool enjoying the sun. Well, it's not just about that. The two guys seemingly enjoying the sun in the other side of the picture. They've moved because of the climate. Are they climate migrants? Different ways at looking at people that have moved. Okay, so in the first two slides, they were people who we felt were forced to move, or people I felt were forced to move. That's what it was implying. They were climate migrants because climate change is nasty, is bad, and it's going to cause impacts, particularly for poor people and marginalised groups who are going to be forced to up sticks and go. Now, the reason that's important to decide who is a climate migrant and who is not is because it affects their protection. It affects the rights that they have. So you might argue that the people who have caused climate change should have some responsibility about taking in migrants who are forced to move because of climate change. Maybe the policies that we think of as in helping people who are affected by climate change might be helping them move by giving them skills training. So when they do move, they get better jobs and they get more money to help the places where they've come from. So it's really quite important to understand who is a climate migrant and why. So in one of my other lives, I work for the United Nations and one of their panels, they have 3 panels, one on climate change, one on biodiversity and ecosystem services, and one on the use and consumption of natural resources. So a natural resource is metals, minerals, biomass, all those sort of things. Now, a recent report by this panel said that over 60% of greenhouse gases, the gases responsible for climate change, come from our extraction and processing of natural resources. I think it's something like 90% of the losses to biodiversity come from the extraction and processing of natural resources. And over 50% of our health impacts, negative health impacts of pollution come from, you got it, consumption of and the extraction of natural resources. So natural resources are really quite key to how we solve the climate crisis. Now, rich countries consume 6 times the natural resources of poor countries. So our lifestyles are responsible for these things like biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution. So unfortunately, we have to cut down on our use of natural resources. The poor countries, they still need to use natural resources to help their development pathways, but we've got to try and cut them down. And the question is, how do we do that? So we've got to cut our consumption of natural resources. And Most people don't want to do that. And that's completely understandable. It's called the loss aversion. It's where you value things that you lose more than you value the things that you've won, you've gained. And I'm just going to give you one example route. Maybe we can avoid that loss, that feeling of loss. And that's through looking at differently at the way in which we consume things. So when we buy something, we don't buy it because we want to own it. We buy it because of the thing it can provide to us. So when you go to buy a light bulb, you don't want the light bulb, you want the light that it produces. Now that's quite key, because if the company that sells you the light bulb also sells you the light, it's responsible for the lifetime of that light bulb. So it wants to minimize the cost of that. So you're automatically getting people to think in much more of a circular economy of decoupling the use of resources from the things that we derive from them. Now, one extra mile to go in that, maybe, is to think what we want from products, from the things that we buy, from the things that we own. And here I'm going to borrow from Ben Fincham's work in the Department of Sociology. He's the head of sociology. And he wrote a book called The Sociology of Fun. You can imagine it was a real page turner. And he basically said, or he showed, that fun is quite transgressive. It feels like a bit naughty. It's messy, it's organic, it grows. And when he did a survey of people about what they imagined, or what they remembered of their childhood that was fun, those people predominantly, it was outside, it was using water as a natural resource, but it was outside, using nature. It wasn't consuming. So in a way, it was a way of having fun that didn't use up natural resources, not in a consumptional way that gives us all of those problems. And the suggestion here is that when you think about what you think of fun, not Facebook type fun, but fun that was a bit more innocent, then you will readjust your way without feeling like it's a loss, your consumption of natural resources. I don't know, might not work. Right, so you might be asking yourself, what's migrants got to do with having fun? I'm not saying that migrants aren't fun, they are fun. But how are the two related? And I think, to me, what's the fundamental relationship between those two? Is they're about looking at things in a different way. You might say that's lenses. Do I look at a migrant as a person who's adapting to climate change, who's forced to move because of climate change, who can't move because of climate change? Different lenses, and they imply different policy responses. When I'm looking at solving climate change, so reducing our natural resource use and consumption, maybe again, I look at it in a different way. Instead of actually cutting down on the use of my natural resources by denying something, I'm saying, well, maybe if I looked at them, what they provide, I would use less, but without knowing that I'm using less, without consciously having to make a choice to do something that I probably don't want to do. If we reframe our relationship with natural resources, we won't feel like it's a loss. That's what I'm kind of suggesting. So I'm suggesting that if you think of what the resources do for you, what services they provide, rather than owning them, that the important bit is owning them. It's not about, it's about what they provide. And in that, I'm suggesting that maybe fun should be the motivator of what resources provide. And in doing so, we will probably end up using less of them. And that's how we might help save us from climate change.